After 40, the evenings are where weight loss is won or lost, and most people are doing it completely wrong. 7 habits, backed by the biology of what actually changes after 40. And number 1 will change how you think about weight loss entirely. Let's get into it. Habit 7. Stop eating at least 3 hours before bed. This one sounds simple. It isn't, because the mechanism behind it is almost never explained correctly. Most people are told not to eat late because the calories turn to fat while you sleep. That framing is an oversimplification that misses the real reason this habit matters so much after 40. Here's what's actually happening. Your body runs 2 distinct metabolic programs, a fed state and a fasted state. In the fed state, insulin is elevated, your liver is processing incoming nutrients, and fat burning is essentially switched off. In the fasted state, insulin drops, and your body begins mobilizing stored fat as fuel. The transition between these states takes time. After a meal, it typically takes between 2 and 4 hours for insulin to return to baseline, depending on what you ate. If you eat at 9 p.m. and sleep at 10 p.m., you are spending the first several hours of your sleep in the fed state, burning almost no fat and suppressing the release of growth hormone, which your body uses overnight to repair tissue and maintain lean muscle mass. After 40, this matters more than it did in your 30s for a specific reason. Growth hormone secretion naturally declines with age. The largest pulse of growth hormone your body produces in a 24-hour period occurs during the first few hours of deep sleep. If insulin is still elevated when that window arrives, it directly suppresses that growth hormone pulse. Less growth hormone means less overnight muscle preservation, and less muscle means a slower resting metabolic rate. A 3-hour gap between your last meal and sleep protects that growth hormone window. It ensures you enter the fasted state before the most metabolically valuable hours of your night begin. Pro tip: if genuine hunger makes a 3-hour gap difficult, a small amount of protein, a few tablespoons of plain Greek yogurt, or a small handful of nuts has a far lower insulin response than carbohydrate-based evening snacks and will not significantly delay the transition to the fasted state. Habit 6. Cool your bedroom down. This one surprises people, but the research behind it is compelling enough that I consider it one of the highest leverage changes you can make with essentially zero effort. Your body has 2 types of fat tissue. White adipose tissue stores energy. Brown adipose tissue burns energy. It generates heat by oxidizing fat directly, a process called thermogenesis. Brown fat is metabolically active in a way that white fat is not, and activating it consistently has a meaningful impact on caloric expenditure over time. The primary trigger for brown fat activation is cold. Specifically, research from the National Institutes of Health found that sleeping in a room kept at around 19 degrees Celsius, 66 Fahrenheit, significantly increased brown fat activity and improved insulin sensitivity compared to sleeping in a warmer room. Participants in that study burned measurably more calories overnight without changing anything else about their diet or exercise. After 40, insulin sensitivity naturally declines. This is one of the core metabolic shifts that makes weight loss feel harder. Your cells become less responsive to insulin's signal to clear glucose from the blood, which keeps insulin elevated longer after meals, which suppresses fat burning. Anything that improves insulin sensitivity is working directly against the primary metabolic obstacle of this decade of life. A cooler bedroom, ideally between 18 and 20 degrees Celsius, activates brown fat thermogenesis, improves insulin sensitivity, and also deepens slow-wave sleep, which is the stage most associated with growth hormone release and metabolic restoration. Pro tip: if you share a bed with a partner who runs warmer, a lightweight breathable duvet combined with a fan directed away from the bed can lower ambient temperature without creating conflict. The goal is cool air, not cold feet. Habit 5. Take a 10-minute walk after dinner. Not a workout, not a run, a 10-minute walk. I want to explain why this specific minimal intervention has a disproportionate impact, because understanding the mechanism will make you far more likely to actually do it. When you eat a meal containing carbohydrates, glucose enters your bloodstream and needs to be cleared. The primary clearance mechanism is insulin, which signals cells to absorb glucose. But there is a second, insulin-independent clearance mechanism that most people have never been told about: muscle contraction. When skeletal muscle contracts, even at the low intensity of walking, it activates transporters called GLUT4 receptors on muscle cell surfaces. These transporters pull glucose out of the bloodstream directly, without requiring insulin to trigger the process. This means a 10-minute walk after dinner can reduce your postprandial glucose peak by a clinically significant amount. Research has shown reductions of between 20 and 30% compared to sitting. Why does this matter for weight loss after 40? Because every glucose spike that isn't cleared promptly results in elevated insulin, and elevated insulin locks the door on fat burning. Flattening the after-dinner glucose curve means insulin returns to baseline faster. The fasted state arrives sooner, and the overnight fat-burning window is extended. There is also a compounding benefit. Consistently lower postprandial glucose reduces glycation, the process by which excess blood sugar bonds to proteins and damages tissue, including the metabolic signaling tissue that regulates hunger and fat storage. After 40, when glycation accumulates faster and repairs more slowly, this is not a trivial benefit. Pro tip: timing matters here. The glucose peak after a meal typically occurs between 30 and 60 minutes after you start eating. Walking within that window, ideally starting about 20 minutes after your last bite, catches the peak at its most impactful point. A walk 2 hours after dinner has far less effect on glucose than a walk taken during the rise. Habit 4: restructure what you eat in the evening, not just how much. This is the habit most weight loss advice gets completely backwards, and it's the one that produces the fastest visible change when you correct it. The standard recommendation is to eat your largest meal at breakfast and taper down through the day. The logic is sound in theory. In practice, most people over 40 have work schedules, family demands, and social lives that make a large, structured breakfast impractical and dinner the main meal of the day. Telling people to reverse decades of eating patterns rarely works. Here is what does work: changing the composition of the evening meal rather than fighting its size. The core principle is this: carbohydrate metabolism is governed by your circadian biology. Your cells are most insulin sensitive, most efficient at processing glucose in the morning. By evening, insulin sensitivity has declined significantly. The same carbohydrate load that your body handles cleanly at 8 a.m. causes a substantially larger and longer glucose elevation at 8 p.m. This is not a discipline issue. It is a biological clock issue. Shifting the evening meal toward protein and fat, with vegetables providing fiber, and reserving the majority of your carbohydrate intake for earlier in the day works directly with your circadian metabolism rather than against it. You are not eating less. You are eating the same food at the right biological time. Protein at the evening meal also directly supports the overnight growth hormone and muscle repair process. During sleep, your body is breaking down and rebuilding muscle protein. A sufficient protein intake at dinner, roughly 30 to 40 grams for most adults, provides the amino acid substrate for that overnight repair. More muscle retained means a higher resting metabolic rate maintained. Pro tip: the most practical way to implement this is not to remove carbohydrates from dinner entirely, but to eat them last. Start with protein and vegetables. Eat any carbohydrates, rice, potato, bread, at the end of the meal. This one sequence change reduces the overall glycemic impact of the meal, even when the total carbohydrate content remains the same, because the prior protein and fiber slow gastric emptying and buffer glucose absorption. Habit 3: create a hard stop on screens, 1 hour before sleep. I want to be direct here, because I know this one is the hardest to implement. And I think it's only hard because people don't fully understand what is actually at stake metabolically. This is not about eye strain. This is not about relaxation. This is about a hormone called melatonin and its direct relationship to fat metabolism. Melatonin is produced by your pineal gland in response to darkness. It signals to your entire body that the night phase has begun. And part of what that night phase involves is a shift in metabolic priority toward fat oxidation and cellular repair. Melatonin also has a direct suppressive effect on insulin secretion, which is part of how your body ensures the overnight fasted state is maintained. The blue light spectrum emitted by phones, tablets, and televisions is the specific wavelength that suppresses melatonin production most aggressively. A 2014 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that evening blue light exposure delayed melatonin onset by an average of 90 minutes and reduced total melatonin levels by around 50%. After 40, melatonin production is already declining as a function of age. You have less of it to begin with. Halving what remains with screen exposure means entering sleep with severely blunted melatonin, which means disrupted fat metabolism, higher overnight insulin, worse sleep quality, and reduced growth hormone secretion. All of those effects compound directly into harder weight loss the following day. Poor sleep raises ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and lowers leptin, the satiety hormone, by measurable amounts. Studies have consistently shown that sleep-deprived individuals consume on average 300 to 500 more calories the following day without being aware of it. 1 hour without screens before bed is not a lifestyle preference. After 40, it is a metabolic intervention. Pro tip: if eliminating screens entirely is not practical, blue light blocking glasses worn for the hour before sleep have been shown in research to meaningfully preserve melatonin levels even with screen exposure. They are not as effective as darkness, but they close a significant portion of the gap. Combined with dimming overhead lights and using warmer lamp tones in the evening, you can substantially recreate the light environment your melatonin system was designed for. Habit 2. Optimize your sleep, not just its length. Everyone knows sleep is important for weight loss. What almost nobody talks about is that after 40, it is the architecture of your sleep, the specific stages and their timing, that determines whether sleep is metabolically restorative or metabolically damaging. There are 2 stages of sleep that matter most for weight and metabolism. Slow-wave sleep, also called deep sleep, is where growth hormone is secreted. Muscle protein synthesis occurs, and insulin sensitivity is reset for the following day. REM sleep is where cortisol regulation is consolidated, and emotional eating patterns are processed at the neurological level. After 40, both stages shorten naturally. The proportion of slow-wave sleep begins declining in the mid-30s and continues through the 40s and 50s. This is why 7 hours of sleep at 45 does not feel as restorative as 7 hours did at 25. The same duration contains less of the stages that do the metabolic work. The specific habits that protect slow-wave sleep are these: consistent sleep and wake times, even on weekends, because the circadian rhythm that gates slow-wave sleep is highly sensitive to schedule disruption. Alcohol eliminated or significantly reduced in the evening. Alcohol suppresses slow-wave sleep even when it helps you fall asleep faster, which is why drinking produces sleep that feels adequate but is metabolically shallow. And the cool bedroom we discussed earlier, which independently deepens slow-wave sleep through its effect on core body temperature. The connection to weight loss after 40 is direct. Adequate slow-wave sleep resets insulin sensitivity overnight. Each night of poor slow-wave sleep leaves you slightly more insulin-resistant than the night before, which means slightly more efficient fat storage, slightly slower fat burning, and slightly stronger carbohydrate cravings the following day. Compounded over weeks and months, this is one of the primary reasons people over 40 feel like their metabolism has fundamentally changed. In many cases, it has. But the driver is sleep architecture, not age alone. Pro tip, magnesium glycinate taken 30 to 60 minutes before bed has the most consistent research support for improving slow-wave sleep depth in adults over 40. A dose of 300 to 400 milligrams is what clinical studies have used. It works by activating GABA receptors in the brain, which quiets the nervous system and facilitates the transition into deeper sleep stages. Unlike many sleep supplements, it does not cause dependency or next-day sedation. Before habit 1, where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I read every one of them, and this community genuinely spans the world. Now, number 1, habit 1, manage your evening cortisol. This is the one that underpins everything else on this list, and it is the one almost nobody is talking about in the context of weight loss after 40. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. It is supposed to be high in the morning. It is actually part of what wakes you up, and low by evening, allowing melatonin to rise and sleep to begin. That is the healthy cortisol curve. But in the modern lifestyle, evening cortisol is chronically elevated. Work emails at 9 p.m., financial stress reviewed before bed, stimulating or emotionally activating content on screens, arguments, unfinished mental loops from the day. All of these keep the sympathetic nervous system activated and cortisol high at precisely the time it should be declining. Here's the direct metabolic consequence for weight loss after 40. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It raises blood glucose by triggering your liver to release stored glycogen. Elevated evening cortisol means elevated evening blood glucose, which means elevated insulin at night, which means fat burning suppressed during exactly the hours when it should be at its peak. Cortisol also directly stimulates appetite, particularly for high-calorie, high-carbohydrate foods, which is the biological origin of stress eating and late-night cravings. And chronically elevated cortisol accelerates a process called visceral fat deposition, the accumulation of fat specifically around the abdominal organs, which is the most metabolically dangerous fat distribution pattern, and the one that becomes increasingly common after 40. After 40, there is an additional layer to this. Cortisol and testosterone have an inverse relationship. When one is chronically high, the other is suppressed. Low testosterone, in both men and women, reduces the capacity to build and maintain lean muscle mass. Less muscle means a lower resting metabolic rate. The cortisol-testosterone dynamic is one of the primary hormonal mechanisms through which chronic stress drives body composition changes in middle age. The intervention is not complicated, but it requires intention. A deliberate wind-down routine in the final 60 to 90 minutes of the day. One that signals to the nervous system that the threat assessment work of the day is complete. This can be a consistent sequence of low-stimulation activities, a warm shower which drops core body temperature when you step out and accelerates sleep onset, journaling to close the open mental loops that keep the prefrontal cortex activated, light stretching or breathing exercises that directly activate the parasympathetic nervous system and measurably reduce cortisol within minutes. The specifics matter less than the consistency. What you are training is a physiological association between a specific evening sequence and a drop in sympathetic activation. The more consistently you run the sequence, the faster and more completely the cortisol decline occurs. Pro tip: the single most evidence-backed breathing technique for acute cortisol reduction is physiological sighing, a double inhale through the nose followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth. 2 to 3 minutes of this pattern has been shown in Stanford research to reduce subjective stress and measurable cortisol faster than any other real-time intervention tested, including meditation. It requires nothing, costs nothing, and can be done in bed. Here's what I want you to take from this. Weight loss after 40 is not harder because your willpower has weakened. It is harder because the hormonal environment of the evening, cortisol, insulin, melatonin, growth hormone, has shifted in ways that work against fat burning during the hours your body should be doing exactly that. Every habit on this list targets one or more of those hormonal levers directly. You are not fighting your biology. You are learning to work with it. Pick one habit from this list and implement it consistently for 2 weeks before adding another. One real change held consistently will outperform 7 changes attempted simultaneously and abandoned within a week. If this was useful, share it with someone who needs it, and I'll see you in the next one.